Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the incredible story of one of the most famous units in the American Civil War, the 54th Massachusetts Volunteer Regiment. And what makes them so remarkable is that they weren't just fighting the Confederacy, they were also fighting for their own rights. It was truly a fight on two fronts. All right, here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at how this pioneering regiment even got started. Then, we'll get right into their legendary charge at Fort Wagner. And finally, we'll uncover their other battle, a fight for something just as important, equal pay. So, first things first, how did the 54th Massachusetts even come to exist? Well, its creation was a massive turning point, not just for the war, but for who was even allowed to fight on the battlefield in the first place. The story really kicks off on January 1st, 1863. That's when President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, this did way more than just declare freedom for enslaved people in the South. It also, for the first time, officially opened the doors for Black men to enlist in the Union Army. And things moved fast. Just 1 month later, the 54th Massachusetts was formed. As soon as Massachusetts Governor John Andrews put out the call for volunteers, the response was just overwhelming. Men came from all over the country. Some had been born free, others had bravely escaped slavery. But they were all united with this incredible sense of purpose. Even the famous abolitionist Frederick Douglass recruited for the regiment, and he showed how much he believed in the cause by enlisting 2 of his very own sons. So they were all organized into what's called a regiment, which is basically just a large organized group of soldiers. Now, while all the enlisted men were Black, their commander was a 25-year-old white officer named Colonel Robert Gould Shaw. He came from a family of prominent abolitionists and was totally committed to their cause. And let's be absolutely clear about the stakes here. The danger these men were stepping into was just immense. The Confederacy had made a terrifying announcement. Any Black soldier captured wearing a Union uniform would not be treated as a prisoner of war. No, they would be executed. And yet, this didn't stop them. Okay, so all of this brings us to their defining moment. The courage of the 54th was about to be put to the ultimate test in an attack on a heavily defended Confederate fort, an act of bravery that would grab the entire nation's attention. It was July 18th, 1863. The 54th was given what was, honestly, a near-suicidal mission: to lead the main frontal assault on Fort Wagner. Taking this fort was absolutely crucial if the Union wanted to capture the major port of Charleston. Now, let's just look at the odds here. Inside that fort, you've got about 1,700 heavily armed Confederate soldiers, totally protected behind its walls. And who was leading the charge against them? Just 600 men from the 54th running across a wide-open beach straight into a storm of cannon and rifle fire. The fighting was absolutely ferocious, much of it hand-to-hand. By the time it was all over, the 54th had suffered just devastating losses. Out of those 600 men, more than 280 were killed, wounded, or captured, including their leader, Colonel Shaw, who was killed at the head of the charge. Now here's the thing. While they didn't actually capture the fort that day, the legacy of what they did was profound. The incredible valor of the 54th completely shattered the racist myths that Black soldiers wouldn't or couldn't fight. Their heroism became a rallying cry, inspiring thousands of new Black recruits to join the Union Army. The Confederates actually tried to insult Colonel Shaw by burying him in an unmarked mass grave right alongside his fallen Black soldiers. When his wealthy parents were later offered the chance to have his body moved, they said no, stating there is no holier place to be buried than surrounded by brave and devoted soldiers. Remember that second front we talked about? The 54th's fight wasn't just on the battlefield. They were also locked into a struggle for basic dignity and equality inside the very army they were fighting for. This slide right here shows a really stark injustice. You see, the U.S. Army paid its soldiers differently based on the color of their skin. White soldiers got $13 a month. Black soldiers? Only $10 for doing the exact same job and facing the exact same dangers. But it was actually even worse than that. Yeah, the gap was way bigger. White soldiers got their $13 plus a $3.50 clothing allowance. But for Black soldiers, $3 was taken out of their $10 pay to cover their uniforms. So when all was said and done, a white private took home $16.50, while a Black private took home only $7. Less than half. So what did they do? Well, their response was all about principle. The entire regiment, with the full support of Colonel Shaw before he died, basically went on what we'd call a labor strike. They kept fighting, they kept drilling, they did all their duties, but they all refused to accept the unfair pay. And this wasn't some short-term protest. They did this for 18 months. For a year and a half, these men served without getting paid a single cent. It was a huge sacrifice, and you can only imagine the hardship it caused for their families back home who were depending on that money. One of the soldiers in the regiment, Corporal Abram C. Sims, captured the feeling perfectly in a letter. He asked, "Can our families live on glowing accounts of battles and brave deeds done?" This was never just about the money. It was about respect. It was a demand to be seen and valued as equals. Their strategy was simple, but man, was it effective. By continuing to serve with honor while refusing the unequal pay, they put political and military leaders in a really tough spot. They proved their commitment was to the country's ideals, not to a paycheck, which made their demand for fair treatment impossible to just brush aside. And you know what? It worked. After 18 long months of protest, Congress finally gave in. They passed a law that granted equal pay to all soldiers. And they even made it retroactive, so the men of the 54th got all their back pay at the correct equal rate. It was a huge victory for civil rights, one with principles, not with weapons. So as we wrap this up, it really leaves us with a big question to think about. The men of the 54th Massachusetts stared down cannon fire at Fort Wagner, but they also faced down a year and a half of hardship to win a battle for their principles. Which one of those fights do you think took more courage? That's really something to consider.